NFL. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to give you our favorite parlays of the week. We're going to give you one apiece, and this is what we're going to stand behind. These are our picks, so that way next week when all four or however many teams in your parlay go south, we can look back and go, man, what an idiot. Before we get into that, I just want to welcome you in. Zach from Pro Football Craze, welcome back. It's always great to have you on the show. How are we doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm excited to get a little parlay action later.
Yep, absolutely. Hopefully do a little bit better. We did last week. Last week was a little rough. I think it was a little rough for everybody around the board. But yeah, we're looking forward, man. Optimism is what's going to keep us pushing through. You know, it's a long season. If we take a L week 1, let's bounce back week 2. But before we get into that, let's get into the mailbag real quick. And the first question we have here is, what are your thoughts on Javonte Williams' workload? Now, we saw basically a 50-50 split between him and Melvin Gordon, with Javonte being the PPR guy and Melvin Gordon being the rusher. What are your expectations and what are your thoughts on Javonte Williams, this Denver Broncos backfield going forward?
Yeah, I think that they utilized him a lot more in the passing game this past week. We saw around a 55 to 45 snaps share between the two of them, which is right on par with what we saw last season. So nothing really out of the ordinary, nothing that was super crazy except for Javonte's receiving numbers with 12 targets and 11 receptions. I think that's a product of being behind for a majority of that game. I expect the rushing numbers to come up as the Broncos should be leading more, especially this upcoming week against the Texans. They shouldn't be fighting from behind. Meanwhile, they shouldn't have been fighting from behind against the Seahawks either. But I think that did contribute a little bit to the high passing volume for Javonte, but I think it's still going to be around a 55-45 split. Might be a little bit higher for Javonte when you look at snap share, but I don't expect him to be anywhere around 70%, which some people were saying. During the offseason, they were like, oh, Javonte 70-75% of the time he's going to be on the field, and I don't think they're going to do that. Melvin Gordon's still there. Melvin Gordon's a much better pass protection back. So he's going to be in there sometimes on first, second down, and then when they need him to block on third down, he's going to be in there, not Javonte. So it's going to be kind of a yin and yang. They're going to work well together. But I expect his targets to come down a little bit, but his rushing numbers should bounce back.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. This is nothing new for the Denver Broncos backfield. We've been dealing with this now, at least for the past, what seems to be the year. But were there any red flags in this game where maybe, we felt so confident with this Broncos offense and maybe we got a little too ahead of ourselves? Is there any issues with this offense, or do we think this was just kind of a mental game for Russ going back to Seattle? And a lot of times that can really mess with a guy's psyche. And overall, when your quarterback is kind of out of it, essentially your whole offense is going to be out of it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that the offense was bound to start off slow. You have a new head coach. We saw him make a bunch of mistakes this past week, and that led to them end up losing the game. So I think that that's something we should have expected. And then Russ going back to Seattle, there was obviously lots of pressure on him. But the biggest thing that we saw was just 2 goal line fumbles, one from each of the backs, and I think that's something that we're not going to see each and every week. So I'm not super worried. They split that goal line work for the most part. We saw each of them get their goal line opportunities, and they screwed that up pretty well. But I think that, there's nothing to be worried about. The wide receivers got involved. Judy and Sutton both had pretty good games. And Agüebanam also got involved, which people were kind of excited about. So, yeah, I think overall we're going to see a much better offense from the Broncos this week. And going forward, I don't have any concerns.
Very good. Still feel confident as a Super Bowl pick?
I do. Yeah. I think that's it's just, new head coach. He'd never done this before. Obviously, he admitted after the game that, he probably should have gone for it. When you have kind of more time and more experience, those are things that do come with that. So I think overall this was a learning game for both him, Russ, and this offense, and I think that they'll be able to build upon that going forward.
Yep, absolutely agree with that. Let's not overreact here with week 1. Just real quick, as we wrap up the Broncos, Sutton or Judy, who do you have more confidence week in, week out for fantasy going forward?
I think Sutton will be the wide receiver one. We saw Judy get involved more early in the game last week, and then Sutton came on strong in the second half. I think it's just Russ feeling out both of them, but I think they'll both be really involved and fantasy relevant. But if I had to pick a wide receiver one for this team, it would be Cortland Sutton.
All right, so let's move on to the next mailbag question we have here. We have going forward, what's your expectation for Saquon? You can't say that Sunday wasn't an anomaly. The thing with Saquon, it's always been injury. It's never been talent. For me, I think if he focuses more on running north and south versus trying to hurdle every opponent in front of him, he probably will have a better health, record going forward. Obviously, you can't predict injuries or really prevent injuries in such a violent sport. But going forward, do you think we see this type of Saquon? Because at this rate, I mean, he's RB1 right now. At this rate, we're looking at, just an incredible season from the running back position for Saquon. Or do you see this as kind of just a blip on the radar?
Well, I think this is a game where you're going up against a defense that's not really elite, especially at stopping the run. So I think that definitely helped. He got real involved in the passing game as well. But one of the number that really stood out to me was his 9.1 yards per carry. That's obviously a number that's going to come down. That's not a number that we've ever seen anyone sustain over a season. That could probably come down to around 5 where he was at on his rookie year as long as he can stay healthy. But the 7 targets is something that I really like to see out of him, get him more involved in the passing game, which helps in PPR. So I think he's going to have a really, really great season, but don't expect him to have 164 yards on 18 carries every week because, as you said, 9.1 yards per carry, that's definitely not going to be something that he keeps up.
Yeah, and a lot of the times, too, if you look at some of the best running backs, with the exception of a few of them, generally they're on pretty good offenses. And I'm not sure if what we saw from the Giants this past week is really, I don't know if you really want to have too much confidence in the offense as a whole and Saquon being a part of that machine. But I do think if he does stay healthy, and that's a big if with someone like him, again, this was his biggest game since 2019. If he is healthy, I don't see a world where he doesn't finish the season as one of the best values in drafts at the running back position, especially when you see a guy like Dalvin Cook start off so slow, Alvin Kamara. You probably were able to get Saquon after those guys too. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's great to see him back on the field performing.
Yeah.
But let's get into this week's action. We have some week 2 games on the horizon. Looking back at some of our mistakes last week, we woofed on the Rams. Texans, we were close. Lions, I think we were pretty close. I'm not sure if we really called any other upsets other than that. So maybe this week we will get right. What we're going to do is give our own parlay of the week. I'm going to do a 4-team parlay here, straight money lines. And I'm going to start with my boys, the Miami Dolphins. They travel to Baltimore to play the Ravens. And right now the Dolphins are the road underdogs at plus 155. We saw them come off of a somewhat impressive win last week. And as a fan, I'm not completely thrilled with what I saw. But as always, the defense came ready to play and were able to get points on the board to help out Tua. Now we play a much tougher opponent, in my opinion. We have, Lamar Jackson. This is a team that at any given time can just put up points on the board. But I do trust this Dolphins offense. I do trust this coaching staff. I think you have overall a really solid defense with Miami. I just don't know what our linebacker situation is looking like, and I can see where that glaring hole in our defense can be taken advantage of, especially with a team like the Ravens who are, so good at running the ball. But at the same time, when you have Javon Holland back there, Xavier Howard, no Byron Jones still, but even with all that being said, the pass rush was there. You had Melvin Ingram coming back from, the depths of free agency and making an impact right away. So that's great to see. And then on the other side of the ball, you had Lamar Jackson doing his thing against the Jets last week. Devin Duvernay super involved. But if we're going to talk about just the betting part of this here, plus 155, just to add some juice to my parlay here, I'm going to go with my boys because it's hard to root against them. And this is an easy underdog pick for me. Let's move on to the next team I have here on this 4-team parlay. And ironically, it's one favorite team of ours right to the next, and that's the Carolina Panthers on the road playing against the Giants, who we just mentioned recently. Right now, Vegas has the odds at plus 110. Carolina, the undercats in this situation. Last week, tough loss to the Browns. Browns' first week one victory in 17 seasons against Baker Mayfield. But I think there's a silver lining to that game. I think Cleveland is a really good team, even with Jacoby Brissett. They still have an incredible defense. You guys did put up 24 points, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And last week, the Giants put up 21 points. And if I have to just look at it from an angle of which offense do I project to keep up and stay ahead in this game, I think it is the Panthers. I like what I saw towards the second half of the game. Obviously, things kind of got up to a shaky start. But the way you guys close the gap, any team that can close the gap like that, I think has a fighting chance every week. Kind of shows that you're really not out of the game, even when you're playing a defense as good as Cleveland. So I like Baker to get right in this situation. This is kind of similar to Russ. Let's take some of the mental part of this game out of it, and let's really see what we have for the on-field product. So with all that being said, I like the Panthers against the Giants, unless Saquon has another incredible game, which you just mentioned earlier. Don't really bank on that every week. And I think if you take out Saquon's performance last week, Giants get smoked. So if the Panthers can just keep Saquon under wraps, which I think is a reasonably feasible task, I think the Panthers get right in this game. Since this is your team, why don't you let us know how you're feeling about this game?
Yeah, I agree. The Panthers are picking my parlay as well. I think that the Panthers should be able to, pick up where they left off. As last week when they played the Browns, they really sucked until the end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter. They had a total of 6 yards of offense in that first quarter. It was absolutely atrocious, horrible to watch. But then when they started to get things going, they were able to hit Robbie Anderson over the top for a 75-yard touchdown. Baker was able to sustain a couple of drives near the end, get the lead with the field goal. Unfortunately, left a little bit too much time on the clock, but Christian McCaffrey began to get more involved. Shi Smith had more of a target share than Christian McCaffrey did last week, and that's not something that I think the Panthers are going to have going forward. Christian McCaffrey is the best player on the field for them, and they got to get him more involved in that passing game, as that is where he excels. So I think that the Panthers will build off of what they did last week. And even though the Giants were able to beat the Titans last week, I think the Panthers defense should be able to hold up well against the Giants wide receivers. Just got to hope we can limit what Saquon Barkley does on the ground.
Yep, totally agree with that one. Like I said, I think the Giants are a lesser opponent than the Browns. Last week could just be like week one flukiness with the Titans. I really like to see Baker and the Panthers get on track here. Let's move on to my next game here. We have the New England Patriots traveling to Pittsburgh to play the Steelers, who are 1-0. New England is 0-1. I'm just not sure exactly a scenario where even if they're playing at home, that the Steelers can, take on a really pissed off Bill Belichick team. That's kind of my opinion, what I think the Steelers are going to be facing here. I think the Patriots as a whole aren't as bad as they appeared last week. I think the Dolphins defense is just really good, and we really have their number, especially when they come to Miami. I think you see a better performance just overall as a team from New England this week. And I really just don't believe in the Steelers. Granted, they walked away with that win last week, but honestly, we all know that they really didn't deserve to win. Anytime you have 5+ turnovers, you pretty much have that game in the bag, and it took a missed field goal in overtime for the Steelers to get it done. So with that all being said, I like the Patriots. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a close game. I really don't trust the Patriots offense enough to bet on them. I think even without TJ Watt, the Steelers have a better defense. The Steelers were a close pick to be in my parlay because I do think they can pull this win off. I'm just not fully confident in Najee Harris being healthy, so I don't want to bet on that at this point in the week. That's really my main concern is just Najee is going to be a big part of this offense. If he plays, I think the Steelers win. If he doesn't play, I think that changes things up a lot for this game.
Yeah, he didn't really look great last week, to be totally honest. And I'm not going to lie, Raheem Mostert and Chase Edmonds didn't look that great either. we'll have to see what this game looks like. To wrap it up with my essentially AFC East dominated parlay here, I got the Buffalo Bills, the easy favorites here. So I have two kind of like, or maybe even three like picks. And then I have a pick that I feel extremely confident in. That is the Buffalo Bills playing at home, minus 460 against the Tennessee Titans, who we just mentioned lost to the New York Giants last week. And if you have to just do a simple who's better, obviously the Bills are much better than the Giants, even though their uniform colors are very similar. At the end of the day, I think Josh Allen, 4 touchdowns in this one. You basically let Saquon set the world on fire. Granted, the Bills don't have a running back like Saquon. Instead, they have a collaborative piece of Josh Allen, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, James Cook if they let him out of the doghouse. Gabriel Davis, absolutely incredible, worth the hype. Stefan Diggs, just as good. Dawson Knox, well, see what's going on with him. Do you agree with Vegas here? Or is this just going to be a pretty easy dub for the Buffalo Bills on, I believe, is this one of the Monday night games?
It is. It's the first of the Monday night games. I think it will be pretty easy in the Bills' favor here. I'm not super worried about the Titans coming off of a loss, but Derrick Henry has looked good against the Bills' defense before, so that is something to keep in mind. But I think the Bills should easily run away with this. They looked like the best team in the NFL this past week.
Yep, I can see a scenario where Bills don't lose any more than 3 games. Josh Allen looked just even better than usual last week. The defense looked great. Von Miller looked spry as ever. Yeah, so I really like Buffalo taking this one. And just to kind of recap my parlay here, 4-team, I'm taking the Dolphins as the underdogs. I'm taking the Carolina Panthers as the underdogs. And then my 2 favorites are the Patriots and the Bills. And as a total, that 4-pick parlay pays out on DraftKings Sportsbook plus 1053. So it's pretty nice. You throw $5, maybe make like $50, $60 back, something like that. I know it's a little different if we're converting currencies here, but why don't you try your hand here and give us your 4-team or how many team parlay you have here and kick it off first.
So currently I have a 6-team parlay, debating really hard between taking one of these teams out. I'm not fully confident, but I do think they have a chance to pull it off. So we're going to start. I'm just going to start with my favorites that I have in here. I have a couple I think are locks. I think the Denver Broncos are going to beat the Houston Texans this week. This is going to be a get-right game for Russell Wilson, the offense, and Nathaniel Hackett. The Texans were able to put up a decent fight against the Colts, but when it came down to it at the end of the game, the Colts were able to make their comeback. I think that the Denver Broncos will get out early and just stay ahead. This is where Javonte will get his rushing numbers up a little bit. So I think they are currently at minus 520. When you put those into a parlay, it is a little bit more favorable than that. So they are my first pick. My other favorite pick is the Los Angeles Rams against the Atlanta Falcons. This is going to be a get-right game for the Rams as well. Matthew Stafford coming back off that hard loss in Buffalo. These are still the reigning Super Bowl champions, and I'm definitely not counting them out. Allen Robinson's going to get more involved. Hopefully we see more of Cam Akers this week. And the Falcons just aren't a good football team. They choked that lead last week against the Saints. So I'm not super worried about them being able to hold the lead in against what, in my opinion, is a better team in the Rams. So those are my first 2, favorite easy locks. And my next easy lock is the Bengals at minus 330 against the Dallas Cowboys, who don't have Dak Prescott. I'm not worried about Cooper Rush coming out here and outplaying Joe Burrow. I think that this Bengals line had 1 week, against a really, really good defensive line in the Steelers, literally the defensive player of the year coming off one of the sides. They got to build chemistry. They got to work together. So it could be a little rough when it comes to Joe Burrow getting hit, but I don't think he turns the ball over 5 times again. They're going to get a long snapper in there who, won't be as good as their permanent long snapper, but he will be much better than what they had last week. So if they need to make a kick at the end of the game, they'll be able to. But I think the Bengals will easily take that game. And then I have 3 underdog picks here. We talked about one already, Carolina. We're both on the same page there. We think Carolina should be able to go into and beat the Giants.
Keep pounding.
Absolutely. And then we're going to talk about a team where you talked about them a little bit last week, but the Minnesota Vikings are currently going into the other Monday Night Football game as the underdogs. The Vikings are playing the Eagles, who the Eagles come off a really good week against the Lions, but the Eagles defense also allowed 35 points. And the Vikings played the Packers and only allowed 7. So really, when you look at that, obviously the Vikings defense a little bit better. Justin Jefferson went off last week. They found this mismatches all across the field, having him lined up against linebackers and safeties. So I think they continue to do that. It's kind of how Cooper Kupp was used last year in LA. They're bringing that over with their new head coach, and now they're going to utilize Justin Jefferson in that way. So I think that they have a very good chance to come out. Kirk Cousins isn't going to cost them this game, and I can see Jalen Hurts costing the Eagles this game if it comes down to it. A.J. Brown had something like a 50% target share last week, and that's not something that's sustainable either. So I think that his numbers will drop a little bit. And I think that the Vikings, they just have what it takes. They have a really good running game, a pretty decent quarterback with some great weapons around him. And I think what they've done to their defense, to Neil Hunter, Zadarius Smith coming off the edge, I think that's going to give the Eagles a little bit of a problem. And they have a pretty good defense around that as well. So I think that they will come out with the win. Do you think the Vikings have a chance to pull off the upset as well?
I do like the Vikings in this situation exactly the way you laid it out too. If I'm going to trust somebody at the quarterback position to lead their team in what seems to be a pretty well-balanced matchup here, I'm going to go with Kirk Cousins. But what the caveat with that is it's a primetime game, and I'm confident that Kirk Cousins is either like winless in primetime games or he is pretty close to it. But at the same time, I read a great article today on The Athletic about how teams are using wide receivers as the new version of a workhorse, like we used to hear with running backs. You have Justin Jefferson, and basically this new coaching staff is just constantly finding ways to get him lined up either on a safety or a linebacker, and no one can really stay with him. And he's just finding these pockets. And especially when you have breakdowns in defenses, usually earlier in the season, they'll say the defense is playing better than the offense. But there are a lot of times where the defense can give up big chunk plays early on in the season while they're still trying to find their cohesiveness. So I could see Justin Jefferson doing the same thing here. But at the same time, I think the Eagles are really frisky. And let's hopefully Devonta Smith decides to show up this game. That's a big factor for them.
Yeah, so looking at the Monday Night Football record for Kirk Cousins, he is 2-9, but those last 2 wins came in his last 2 Monday Night Football games. So I think that's something he's been able to get over.
He's turning the corner.
He started off 0-9, but he's been able to get that back. And then this one last team, they're a team that I don't necessarily have as the favorite to win. They're currently plus 120, so they do add that underdog side to this parlay. They're going against a team that currently has 5 of their 7 wide receivers on the injury report. Their starting running back is on the injury report, and this team has had their number the past few times they've played, and I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their healthy wide receiver, Mike Evans, is going to be going up against Marshawn Lattimore all game. And Marshawn Lattimore has been able to keep Mike Evans to, I think, below 4 receptions in each of the past 4 games that they've played against each other. Dennis Allen has always had Tom Brady's numbers, and the Saints have always been able to compete with this Bucs team, no matter whether they're the better team or not. The Saints are always in these games, and they always seem to find a way to pull it off. Jameis Winston looked good come the second half of that game in Atlanta. So I think that's something that they can continue to build off of. Kamara is currently dealing with a rib injury, but I think he'll be playing this week. Michael Thomas looked good last week. And I think the Saints team just has a little bit of fight going up against apparently an all-injured team in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. Fournette's dealing with a hamstring. Godwin's dealing with a hamstring. Gage didn't practice today. Julio didn't practice today. Like, they're really dealing with these injuries. And it's only week 2. I think that the history between these 2 teams, the history between Dennis Allen and Tom Brady, I think the Saints have a really good shot at beating the Bucs this week. Do you feel the same, or do you think the Bucs will finally be able to get the Saints number here?
No, I'm with you on this one. I just didn't want to touch this game because with them last week, being the they were the home favorites, or they were the road favorites, and then now they're the home underdogs. So for me, it's just I don't like that movement too much, to be totally honest. And I saw two different teams last week for New Orleans. The first half was whatever it was, and then the second half, I mean, even towards the final quarter, James Winston was just on fire. I mean, I picked him in a in-game alive betting to come back and win that game, so that was awesome to see. You mentioned it, Mike Evans, just he is shut down anytime he lines up with Marshawn Lattimore, and if he's the only viable option there, I mean, what's to stop the Saints from shadowing him all game, essentially double covering him? And it's not like you have to worry about Russell Gage. It's like, so I mean, I just don't know what else they have, especially when you sprinkle in just the fact that the Saints always have the Bucs number. So yeah, I do agree with this one. I don't necessarily have it in my parlay, but I do like the pick, and I like what your logic is.
Yeah, so if you look at the past 7 regular season games that the Saints and the Bucs have played, the Saints have won them all. The only game in the past 3 to 4 years that the Buccaneers were able to win against the Saints was a playoff game. And obviously we know what Tom Brady does in the playoffs. But the last 7 games against the Buccaneers, the Saints have won. So that's something else to look at, is the fact that there is a bunch of history here. And the Saints seem to always do it. Dennis Allen knows exactly how to get on Tom Brady's nerves, how to throw him off his game. The Saints have a pretty good defensive front. They're able to get their pressures in. So I think that they have a good chance to pull this off. So to recap, my 6-team parlay favorites I have are Bengals, Broncos, and Rams. And then I have the Panthers upsetting the Giants, the Vikings upsetting the Eagles, and I have the Saints upsetting the Buccaneers, which gives you a total of 6 parlay, plus 1728. So a little bit higher than yours, more risk involved because there is 2 extra games. But I feel fairly confident with most of those games, except for the Saints. I'm a little hesitant just because, as you said, we saw 2 different teams last week when we were watching them. But I think that this is the Bucs, this is the Saints. Hopefully the Saints can pull this one off and not be the reason this parlay fails.
Very good. All right, we'll have to check back in on these 2 parlays, and we'll give you a 2-team differential to make up for the fact that you have 2 extra ones. But if you do get if you get any additional right, we'll give you the credit. So we'll give you a free pass on this one. Since I only have 4, you get 6. But if you get all 6 right, we'll still give you the 6 points. And yeah, man, it'll be exciting to see this weekend. Maybe things will kind of level out a little bit. And early on in the season like this, there's times where we can kind of take advantage of Vegas still trying to figure teams out. So if you feel like you have a pulse on a team, or an instance where the Bucs just can't beat the Saints in the regular season with all those injuries, you try to put those pieces together. And I really like those parlays that we have. And I'm going to keep an eye on it. Even the ones that you have, I'll keep an eye on it on Sunday and Monday and see where we're at. We'll check back in next week. But before we go, just want to say thank you for your time, and thank you for the info and the wonderful parlay. If I lose money this week on your parlay, I'll be coming to find you. No. Again, just to recap, we are not professional gamblers, just 2 guys trying to watch some football. Zach, Pro Football Craze, catch him on Crazy's Corner every Friday on the Fantasy Football Network. Catch me on there as well. Jeff and Will from Media. Make sure to go download the Media app. Watch another episode of Catch the Wave on the Fantasy Football Network. Pro Football Craze, Ocean State FF, Parlays. Go get you some money. Let's go Dolphins. Keep pounding Panthers. We'll check back in with you next week.